Imagine a man who rules one of the most powerful nations on earth, yet lives in constant, paralyzing terror that a single hug or a clumsy stumble will shatter his body into 1,000 jagged shards of glass. This was not a fairy tale or a metaphor for a fragile ego. This was the lived reality of King Charles VI of France. To his subjects, he was both a beloved sovereign and a tragic enigma. To history, he is the Glass King, a man whose mind became a fractured mirror, reflecting the chaos of a kingdom on the brink of collapse.
To understand the man who would eventually fear his own touch, we must look back to a time when he was known by a very different name, Charles the Beloved. Born in 1368, Charles was the son of the wise and capable Charles V. He inherited the throne at the tender age of 11. It was a heavy crown for a child, placed upon his head in the midst of the 100 Years' War. Because he was too young to rule, the kingdom was placed in the hands of his 4 uncles, the Dukes of Burgundy, Anjou, Berry, and Bourbon. These were men of immense ambition and even greater greed. They spent the royal treasury on their own private wars and drained the peasantry with crushing taxes, nearly driving the French people to open revolt.
Yet, as Charles reached his late teens, there was a glimmer of hope. He was handsome, athletic, and possessed a natural charm that won over the common folk. In 1388, at the age of 20, he finally seized the reins of power from his corrupt uncles. He dismissed them from court and brought back his father's old advisors, a group of humble, efficient men known as the Marmosets. For a few years, it seemed as if a golden age was returning to France. The king was young, the government was reforming, and the people were optimistic. But the shadows were already lengthening. The first crack in the glass appeared in the sweltering summer of 1392. Charles was 23 years old. He had set out on a military expedition to punish the Duke of Brittany for harboring a man who had attempted to assassinate the king's close friend. It was a hot, oppressive August day as the royal army marched through the forest of Le Mans. Charles was already on edge, suffering from a fever and bouts of erratic behavior. Suddenly, a barefoot man dressed in rags rushed from the trees and grabbed the king's horse by the bridle. He screamed a terrifying warning. "Ride no further, noble king. Turn back. You are betrayed." The man was chased away, but his words hung in the stagnant air like a curse. A few moments later, a page riding behind the king accidentally dropped a heavy steel lance. It struck the helmet of another soldier with a sharp, ringing metallic crack. To Charles, that sound was the breaking point. He drew his sword, screamed, "Forward against the traitors!" and spurred his horse into a murderous frenzy. He didn't attack the enemy, he attacked his own men. Before his knights could finally wrestle him from his horse, the king had killed 4 of his own personal guard. He fell into a deep coma that lasted for days. When he finally woke, the Charles the world knew was gone. In his place was a man whose mind was a shifting landscape of paranoia and delusion.
This was the beginning of a 30-year struggle with what we would likely diagnose today as paranoid schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, but which the medieval world could only view as a terrifying mystery or a divine punishment. The most famous of his delusions, and the one that gave him his moniker, was the glass delusion. During his long bouts of absence, as his court called them, Charles became convinced that he was made entirely of glass. He lived in mortal fear that his bones were transparent and brittle. To prevent himself from shattering, he had special clothes reinforced with iron ribs sewn into them so that he wouldn't break if he moved too quickly. He forbade anyone from touching him, even his wife, Queen Isabeau of Bavaria. He would spend hours standing perfectly still in a corner, terrified that the slightest vibration from a footstep would cause him to crack. But the glass delusion was only one facet of his suffering. There were times when he forgot his own name. He would wander the halls of his palace, terrified of the royal coat of arms, claiming he didn't know who the man on the throne was. Most heartbreakingly, he often failed to recognize his own children and would flee in terror from his wife, claiming she was a stranger who was persecuting him. There were months-long stretches where he refused to bathe or change his clothes, living in such filth that he developed agonizing sores and infestations. When the doctors finally forced him to clean himself, they had to use men disguised in blackened faces to scare him into the bath, hoping the shock would break his trance.
The tragedy of Charles VI was amplified by a horrific event known as the Bal des Ardents, or the Ball of the Burning Men, in 1393. During a wedding celebration, Charles and 5 of his lords dressed up as wild men in costumes made of linen soaked in highly flammable pitch and covered in shaggy hemp to look like fur. They were chained together to perform a dance.
The king's brother, the Duke of Orleans, held a torch too close to one of the performers to see who was under the mask. A spark flew, and within seconds, the dancers were transformed into living torches. Charles was only saved because his young aunt, the Duchess of Berry, recognized him and threw her heavy velvet skirt over him to smother the flames. He watched, trapped in his costume, as 4 of his closest friends burned to death in agony. The trauma of this night solidified his descent into darkness. As the king's mind shattered, so too did the Kingdom of France. With no one truly at the helm, the court devolved into a bloody civil war between 2 factions, the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. It was a feud fueled by the rivalry between the king's brother, Louis of Orleans, and his cousin, John the Fearless of Burgundy. In 1407, John the Fearless had Louis assassinated in the streets of Paris, plunging the nation into a cycle of revenge and chaos. This internal rot did not go unnoticed across the English Channel. King Henry V of England saw the fractured state of France as a divine invitation to reclaim lost territories. In 1415, while Charles was lost in one of his long periods of madness, the English longbowmen devastated the French nobility at the Battle of Agincourt. France was leaderless, bleeding, and broken. The ultimate humiliation came in 1420 with the Treaty of Troyes. In a moment of supposed clarity, though many suspect he was coerced or manipulated in his weakened state, Charles VI signed away the future of France. He disinherited his own son, the Dauphin, and recognized Henry V of England as his legal heir. He even gave his daughter, Catherine of Valois, to Henry in marriage. Charles VI died in 1422, a broken man of 53, who had spent 42 years on the throne, though he had truly lived for very few of them. His legacy is one of the most poignant in the annals of royalty. He was a king who was deeply loved by his people, who nicknamed him the Well-Beloved, even in the depths of his madness, because they pitied his suffering and remembered the promise of his youth. His reign left France in ruins, occupied by foreign invaders and torn apart by civil strife. Yet his story is more than just a political tragedy. It is a human one. It is a reminder that even those who sit on the highest thrones are susceptible to the fragile mechanics of the human mind. The Glass King was a man trapped in a transparent prison, watching his world fall apart while he struggled to simply remain whole. His death paved the way for the rise of Joan of Arc and the eventual crowning of his son, Charles VII, who would go on to reclaim France. But the memory of the king who feared he would shatter remains a haunting mystery of the Middle Ages, a story of a crown that was far too heavy for a mind made of glass. Subscribe now for more deep dives into history's most fascinating mysteries.